Well, as we've come back week in each week of this month and throughout the summer, looking at Psalms and see not only that does God reveal who He is a great deal in Psalms, but He reveals so much about ourselves as well that we can learn a great deal about who we are and learn a lot about our lives just by reading the Psalms. But I ask you, what lessons can we learn even from our greater struggles? What lessons are there to learn from something like failing health? What lessons could we possibly learn from something like national crisis? These are the things that in Psalm 102, the psalmist is trying to figure out, God, help me to make sense of this. What are you doing here? Even if I don't understand this, what is being shown to me here, who will understand? Who will see what you're doing? The lesson for us here in Psalm 102 that we're about to see is, and in many ways I'm grateful for what Aaron just prayed, this reminder of there's more than just us, but the coming generations. There are those after us that God is still at work in. So we're going to see here in this passage the great despair that we feel of the present can also be the great story and the great message of redemption for those coming after us. Let us see here in Psalm 102 where God speaks. Psalm 102, a prayer of one afflicted when he is faint and pours out his complaint before the Lord. Hear my prayer, O Lord. Let my cry come to you. Do not hide your face from me in the day of my distress. Incline your ear to me. Answer me speedily in the day when I call. For my days pass away like smoke. My bones burn like a furnace. My heart is struck down like grass and has withered. I forget to eat my bread. Because of my loud groaning, my bones cling to my flesh, like a desert owl of the wilderness, like an owl of the waste places. I lay awake, like a lonely sparrow on the housetop. All the day my enemies taunt me. Those who deride me use my name for a curse. For I eat ashes like bread and mingle my tears with my drink. Because of your indignation and anger, you have taken me up and thrown me down. My days are like an evening shadow. They wither away like grass. But you, O Lord, are enthroned forever. You are remembered throughout all generations. You will arise and have pity on Zion. It is time to favor her. The appointed time has come. For your servants hold her stones dear and have pity on her dust. Nations will fear the name of the Lord, and all the kings of the earth will fear your glory. For the Lord builds up Zion. He appears in his glory. He regards the prayer of the destitute, does not despise their prayer. Let this be recorded for a generation to come, so that a people yet to be created may praise the Lord, and that he looked down from his holy height. And from heaven the Lord looked at the earth to hear the groans of the prisoners, to set free those whom were doomed to die, that they may declare in Zion the name of the Lord, and in Jerusalem his praise. When peoples gather together and kingdoms to worship the Lord, he has broken my strength in mid-course. He has shortened my days. Oh my God, I say, take me not away in the midst of my days, you whose years endure throughout all generations. Of old you laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you will remain. They will all wear out like a garment. You will change them like a robe, and they will pass away. But you are the same, and your years have no end. The children of your servants shall dwell secure, and their offspring shall be established before you. This is the word of the Lord. Have you ever recorded or made some sort of account of your sorrow, of moments of great sadness, of grief? What do you do with the worst feelings you've had? Where do you take them? Do you put them out in your prayers? Do you journal them out? Do you even dare to share them with another friend? Or do you just keep it stuck inside? I think we all know and have had that experience of feeling like no one can know, no one can understand, and we feel that we can manage for a time, but it seems to eat out from the inside. The prayers of this psalmist just pour out from him, because I think that is what our great pain often does. It just shoots out from us. But what do? Do we just empty it out like a cough? Or do we channel it into something? Dare we even try to create something with our moments of greatest sorrow? I've been thinking, even yesterday as I was reflecting on this, how much great art can be born out of great pain. We think of beautiful art as a labor of love, but what about art that is a labor of grief, a labor of pain, a labor of shock? There's something scary about that, right? There's something beautiful and creative, right, in creating something out of your pain, but the scary thing is once you write it out, once you put it into words or carve it into stone, well, then it's out there. People can know it. It's seen. Now they know a part of me that I didn't know what to do with or didn't know how to share. But let me show you the beauty of what that is, to not just share our pain with one another, but in creating something out of it, we're actually using and targeting that pain in a way to help others. When you think about artwork or songs or movies that are created out of an artist wrestling with grief, is that it's helping many others down the road identify with that and say, oh, you just put into words something that I felt deeply but didn't know what to do with. That by creating something, making some sort of story or chapter out of our pain or of our grief, it is helping others to connect to that and understand what they're experiencing. I mean, how many of you have ever put together a playlist of just sad feelings, right? There's something productive in that someone else's pain or sadness is now musically going through your ears to connect, to reverberate with what you yourself are feeling. I think some of the hymns that have been written years and years ago have been created out of grief and pain. Some of the hymns by William Cooper wrote the hymn of There is a Fountain Filled with Blood. He was a man who struggled periodically, again and again, with great, intense depression. And what he did with that was write hymns for us to sing, because in times where he could barely even understand or believe for himself, he wrote out what he knew he needed to believe, and that is something that guides us, that we can sing out our pain and our grief as well. The hymn, It Is Well With My Soul, was written after the author, Horatio Spafford, learned that his family was lost at sea and died. And at the greatest tragedy of this man's life, he was able to pen out the words, "It is well with my soul." It is great use for us when others before us, centuries before us, write out their grief and their pain, because it is of great aid to us as well. And this is what the Psalms are for us. They not only teach us about ourselves, right? But the Psalms here teach us a great deal about our suffering, for us to connect with that. We can be thankful for the psalmist here, who, as it says, was afflicted, faint, and poured out his complaint to God, that when you are feeling a great complaint before God, you could pray these same words as well. But the Psalms are much more than just a place for us to say, yes, I feel that way too. But the productive thing about our Psalms that we have as well is that the Psalms are generational hope. We talk a lot about trauma, pain, and generational trauma. You know, the ways that, a grandfather was sinned against in his youth gets passed down to that third and fourth generation, right? We're constantly being sinned against and sinning, and that follows down through us, and it brings great pain, great trauma. But have you ever considered that there's also such a thing as generational hope? That in light of trauma, in the light of pain, in the light of grief, gospel reformation can happen, where hope can actually be passed down through that story. And that's also what the Psalms give us. That's what Psalm 102 gives us as well. That in the midst of great tragedy and pain, there can also be hope passed down generation to generation. All the way to us now today. Over millennia, the hope that this psalmist was wrestling with is passed down for you today to hold and see and understand. So it gives us a calling, since God does pass down his hope to us, generation to generation. We can and we should, like the psalmist, pray desperately. Let your prayers be desperate. Let, as we do it, still look with hope to what God is doing, so that we also may tell of his salvation from generation to generation. Know this, that in your most desperate pain, God does hear you and see you. As the psalmist opens and calls out, asking God to hear them, he describes his situation in verse 3. Calling on God not to hide his face, but open his ear, for my heart is struck down like grass and is withered. I forget to eat my bread, because my loud groaning, my bones cling to my flesh. Like a desert owl of the wilderness, like an owl of waste places. I lie awake like a lonely sparrow on a housetop. He's feeling all this great grief, this pain, this challenge before him. In the end of it, he says, quite sadly, that he feels like he's withering away like grass. Do you see the picture of the physicality? How physical this psalm is, right? You can almost see what the disease, whatever it is, whatever he was wrestling with, has so affected him. When we think about grass in a hot climate, the vegetation of the field just shriveling and dying out. I often think of growing up, and sometimes around here too, when we get prolonged times of heat and no rain, that the grass starts to turn yellow and almost this orange, and it hurts to walk on because it's so dry and prickly. The beautiful verdant fields that we have suddenly turning to something horrible to look at. Remember a couple years ago when we had quite a bit of drought throughout June and July, all the grass looked like that. This happens when the sun beats down and the rain has been withheld. That's what the psalmist feels like, the rain of God's mercy, the face of God being withheld from him. He is afraid that God is no longer looking at him. And just the heat and the oppression of the sun is drawing him out and emptying out his days. His very grief, he talks about, is his meal. His grief is his meal. In verse 9, it talks about his bread being ashes, his drink tears. In great depression or sadness, where is your appetite? Right? It's gone. It's dried up. When he talks about ashes, that was something that was very familiar to people in grief. It was an outward sign of showing your pain, putting ashes on you. It was a reminder to say, this is what I will become one day, just ash. It was remembering their own mortality. When he goes to drink, what pours out from his face and into his mouth are just simply his tears. Everywhere he goes, when he's trying to even be sustained for the day, all he has is to face his grief. Does that connect with any of you? Have you felt meals like that are just ash and tears? What kind of despair leads you there? Has it been a physical infirmity you've dealt with, a heartache, a feeling of something being so unfair that these evil days are in front of you now? Feeling of insecurity, where you feel like you have no power to find the solution here and you're wondering why you can't find the answers. And in times like that, you might even kind of give up hope of why pray, because God is, as the psalmist seems to have full confidence in, that God is still very much sovereign. The psalmist has full confidence that God is in control. But why then would you pray? You might wonder. Because even though he's fearful that God doesn't hear, or he's fearful that God's face is turned away, he still has a desperate hope that God does turn to him. And secondly, if you're constantly reminded of your mortality, where else would you go to one who doesn't change? If you're struggling with how much your life has changed before you, go to one who hasn't and will not ever change. That's why in the end, in verses 25 to the end, he's talking about this contrast between humans wearing out like an old garment, but God being the same. And the contrast that he brings up there might even feel insulting of, yeah, my body's wasting away, but don't rub it in, psalmist, right? But it's a reminder we need to see. All things here wear out eventually. The new car smell dissipates. The good gas mileage wears down, and no matter how nice it is when you bought it, eventually mileage wins out and proves the victor. We are like garments that wear out. I was really proud of the fact that a couple of pairs of jeans I got like 5 years ago, hung in there for quite a while, but the holes started to show up, and I had to replace them, right? I mean, the jeans are, in terms of just clothing technology, really remarkable versus what they had in the Old Testament. I'm sure they got holes and things pretty quickly. But even all that tightly woven cotton together, that wears out in time just by crawling on the floor with your kids. We are quite like that. The best medical technology, the best health routine. Wow, we've come such a long way, but eventually time wins out and we wear out like a couple of hard-worn Levi's. Our desperation that I say we should pray with comes from the understanding we are mortal, we're finite. But the psalmist continues to put his hope in one who doesn't change. You will remain, he says. They will pass away, but you are the same. Your years have no end. There's hope there. There's comfort there. But it's not only that even though we're wasting away and God remains the same, he listens. He does regard the prayer of the destitute. He doesn't despise their prayer. So in your greatest grief and your greatest desperation, God does not despise it. He's not going to say, oh, this person again. Oh, you again. Oh, he regards you. If God had ears, they'd perk up at that, right? His face does turn to you. His glory is upon you. He listens. So let that desperation pour out like the psalmist does here. Be as graphic and descriptive as he is. Don't feel like you have to get the words perfectly. But in that desperation, you are praying to a God who doesn't change because there is, in the end, a hope. That because he doesn't change, he will be with you always. The psalm kind of seems to change a little here in the subject. As he moves then after verse 11 and verse 12, he moves not almost to a physical crisis, but now to a national crisis he seems to be facing. You are enthroned forever throughout all the generations. Arise and have pity on Zion. He's worried about Jerusalem. Zion meaning the hill in Jerusalem, really the jewel of Israel's crown. Sees a great threat. Some people believe this could be related to the Babylonian crisis, either right before exile or right after exile has begun. Sometime around then, as we talked about in Daniel, the great fear of reckoning with, we've been taken away, the temple has been burned. What does that mean for my identity as a follower of God? Like all those questions, the psalmist is beginning to wrestle with. God, will you have pity on us? Us as a nation, will you do anything? And he has hope. Even though Jerusalem would be burned down to the ground. Yes, the temple would be rebuilt, but not in its full glory. And yet, the psalmist has hope. Maybe not for his current time, but that one day restoration would happen. His hope is interesting here. That we see, as I kind of signaled at the beginning, the hope here. The hope he has is not that his life is going to get better. In many ways, I think he sees his life and the situation in his homeland of Israel pretty much written out already. That it probably might not end well for him. But why could he have hope then if his life seems to be ending in tragedy? Because future generations will see of this story and know of God's glory. Future nations as well. He is not so fixated on the nation of Israel getting to be on top again. Notice that in that section there, in verse 15 especially. Nations will fear not the name of Israel. Nations will fear the name of the Lord. He's most concerned with the name of Yahweh being feared, no matter what happens to him and his body, or Jerusalem, no matter what happens. In the end, God will make sure that all nations worship and know him. He said the appointed time has come. God knows the time of this redemption, of this salvation. And so the psalmist is able to look through this crisis in his homeland, because God takes care of his own. God is at work, doing his work, that other nations will fear the Lord. He will build up Zion. The connection here, though, again, is not that Israel becomes this great, amazing, powerful nation again. No. The salvation, the message to all the nations doesn't come from the temple being rebuilt, from the walls of Jerusalem being rebuilt that we see in Ezra, in Nehemiah. No, the fulfillment of the hope of the psalmist comes not in Zion, but through Zion to the world. Salvation comes through Zion to coming generations. And what that means, it is through the Son of God, Jesus Christ, being born in Bethlehem, going that final week of his life into Jerusalem, being crucified, buried, and then rising again. That is how other nations will come and fear the Lord. Nations of which many of us descend from, not from Israel, not from Zion, but it's because of the man who was carried outside of Jerusalem and crucified that we stand here today telling of salvation. The coming generations will know this story. That is the hope of the psalmist fulfilled. So we might fear national crises or church crises. The news will continue to fill us with dread, as I'm sure it does for many of us. Even as I was writing that, things, of what could fill us with dread, whether it's protests in LA against ICE, assassinations in Minnesota, or even as far as last night, worried, are we now a nation that's going to war? Fear, right? God, will you save us? Who's at control right now? What is happening right now? And it feels like everything we're living through is going to be its own chapter in the history book some way. But I think in some ways that's, big view of time, but it's also too small a view of time, because every event that's happening here is not just for historians to someday debate on sometime. We're not just statistics in the appendix of a history book. We are part of God's story. We are characters, we are pieces, we are important parts of God's story, of his salvation, that people are going to tell long after we are gone and with God. God's writing a plan of glory even through horrible events that we see every day. Know this, our bodies wear out. So do nations. Institutions end up as a tattered, moth-eaten flag from a long-dead empire. As I thought about that tattered old picture of a garment, I thought of our national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner, which is not just simply a national anthem about a flag. A flag is a symbol of a national identity, right? But the anthem depicts an attack in, I believe, the War of 1812, of how a flag in that fort stood strong throughout a whole long barrage of artillery. It's a symbol of survival in its trial, right? But may I be so unpatriotic as to suggest there will be one day where the American flag will just simply be an artifact in an archaeological museum. There will one day not be a nation behind the symbol, but it will just be part of history, a study of a bygone people. I convict us with that because our nation, our community cannot be our everlasting, it cannot be an eternal identity that we put all of our hope in. But we can have hope that right now God is still at work even in our nation. That one day people, we hope, can look at the history of today and see God's hand at work. I don't know what he's doing right now, but we know it is for his glory and that others one day will come and know the name of the Lord. A crucified Savior whose love covers all sins of people, past and future. That's our identity. That is not a flag that will be tattered and become an artifact someday. That is eternal. Our hope is in the cross. That does not wear out. And that hope goes on to coming generations of who we will continue to tell of and speak to again and again. I think this psalm really turns here at verse 18. Let this be recorded for a generation to come, so that a people yet to be created may praise the Lord. That he looked down from his holy height from the heaven and looked at earth. The psalmist is concerned. Is God looking at me? Does God see me? Does God know my crisis? Does God know my nation's crisis? Does God see us and hear us? And the psalmist is saying, I'm writing these things out. The pain I was facing in body, the pain I was feeling in the existential crisis of my nation, so that one day a generation, perhaps us right here, yet to be created, would know that God came down, that God saw us, that God had mercy on us. The psalmist knows he may not survive to see the next generation, but God's salvation will, and the generation after that, and after that. That is our hope. That our experiences right now are not insignificant to God. He sees and regards it. And also, your pain and your struggle or your fears are not insignificant to future generations either. There will be a great accounting of it. All to God's glory of how he came and regarded you and looked upon you. People will hear and know. I don't know who. Whether it's just a grandchild, whether somehow something gets written somewhere in a newspaper and is found by someone else. But God cares of our suffering and will show the ways that we were regarded and seen by him. So our duty is simple. In our desperate prayer, to look with hope, so that in our very lives, people will know we lived to tell of God's salvation. Because our hope was not in what's happening right now. Our hope is not in the success of our bodies living forever, or our nations living forever, or whatever it might be. That our hope has always been, and that we are saved, redeemed, and held close to a God who doesn't change, and that is what sustains us. The psalmist's hope hinges on the fact that the world is temporary. His life is temporary. So the most productive thing he can use is use his pain to tell to the coming generations that God heard the groans of the prisoners, that God heard those who were doomed to die, that people would declare that God saves, that all nations would come together and worship the Lord. That is his hope. This world is passing away. Our institutions won't last forever. As I go to General Assembly this week, I was, think perhaps the Presbyterian Church in America may not last forever either. Because that's not where my hope is. Harvest will not last forever. That's not where my hope is. But in his people and the future generations continuing to come and know Jesus, who does not change, has not changed. Our bodies fade away, but they will be resurrected one day. Yes, right now is not the end of the story. You are not the end of the story. I might die, but God's story does not begin and end with me. The future generations continue on. When we think of your own ancestors, those who are before you, your parents, your grandparents, those before them, think of the story of their work, their sacrifice, that are a part of what brought you here today. All of us are here right now in America in some way, shape, or form because of an immigrant who came here, who crossed an ocean to get here. That's no small thing to think of, wow, what they have done, how God has been with them to bring them here, and God was with their children. They're God's faithfulness continually. And maybe you're living that out right now. And God will be faithful to you. God is. Continually. The beauty of the gospel is not just a singular story of something that happened long ago that our ancestors have been, bringing down to us generation to generation, but that God, what he did on that Good Friday, is something where he regarded you today you're regarded, you're thought of, his face turned towards you, and the death of Christ on the cross. That's why the psalmist's hope is in the children, knowing that they will dwell secure. Psalmist's final hope is in us. To him, we are just children's children's children. And his hope that we will dwell secure, that even if that psalmist dies, if Zion falls, we, God's people, dwell secure all in the end. Because we know this. Does God see me? Does God know my pain? Does he know my struggle? In the blood of Jesus, your cries are heard. In the wounds of his hands and his feet and side, your despair is seen. Because though, as he says, yes, we wear out, but God remains the same. That means our comfort, our hope is unchanged. Our source of it is unchanged. For the one who was sacrificed rose again and triumphed over the grave, so will we one day. That's why I want to remind us here today that our hope is eschatological, meaning our hope is to the end. It's pointing future. Our hope is future-oriented. It's eschatological. It means that our hope is not nostalgic. And my, isn't that a great temptation just to think about, man, if we could only just get back to when things were easier, when things were cheaper, when things were easier, where everyone agreed more. We have a rose-colored vision of the past, and if we just try to get back to those days gone by and restore things, we're trying to repair a moth-eaten garment, one that is worn out. No, look ahead. Not just to institutions or to yourself, but to future generations, that God is still doing work, and that your story is still part of that. That we can pray that future generations will know that in my suffering and in our suffering, God looked and he regarded us. Every week we close with a benediction. The pastor of the church comes forward and gives a blessing. And it's not a blessing that the pastor has written, but it is God speaking. God speaking his blessing to you. So we often use that one from Numbers of what the priests would give to the people. If the Lord bless you and keep you, the Lord make his face to shine upon you. Perhaps we don't think enough about what it means that God's face is turned towards you. If God's face is turned towards you and blessing you, he's regarding you. So as a way to help us just continue to reflect on that blessing we're about to receive in the next few minutes, we'll be singing through the words of that blessing. Singing through and meditating, what does it mean that God's face is turned towards me and that his blessing is not just for now, but that message of salvation in the name of Christ is for generations after us. So take some time to pray, and then we will reflect in song on what it means for God's face to be upon us.